Okay, so what we're thinking about now is the last part before we do our tabletop, which is the considerations for emergency planning. So thinking about what the public services have to consider when writing their emergency plans and what they're going to do with regards to that. So the first thing we need to think about is the types of major incident plans. So there are actually three different types. So if we look at the top, we've got a generic plan. So the idea being is this could be used anywhere. So the London Major Incident Manual is really an example of a generic plan. There's nothing too specific in there. It can be applied to a range of different major incidents, but it's very generic. Obviously then we've got specific plans. Those are going to be used for more specific incidents. Obviously going to have more specific work from the public services in there, more specific terms, more types of equipment that they might use, etc. And then the last one is a site specific. So this could be for somewhere like a shopping centre. So for example, Lakeside might have a site specific major incident plan. A hospital, I think on Moodle there's the Barts Hospital emergency plan on there that you can have a look at. So the idea being is rather than just being generic, it's thinking about where the major incident might take place or how a particular site might deal with a particular major incident. Alright, so that's the first thing to consider. Right, moving on, then we've got the consideration. So this is the key bit for the pass criteria. Alright, so you're going to need to talk about these in detail and go through each one. So we'll go through what they are and then we'll go through them in detail. Alright, so our considerations are assessment, prevention, preparedness, response, and then the recovery. So each one of those we're going to talk about in depth, and then you're going to have to talk about that in your assignment. Okay, so the first thing is assessment. So obviously thinking about what potential incidents might occur. So thinking about what's happened in the past, thinking about particular intelligence that's coming up, thinking about what could be potential incidents. So obviously at the moment we've got a lot of terrorist attacks, so that could be one. Flooding could be one. Obviously we are now in the middle of a pandemic, which means that major incident plans could get rewritten after this if we were to have another worldwide or UK-based pandemic. Think about what the risks are going to be, so very similar to the risk assessments you'll do for anything else. Identify the risks and then assess them and how they can be hopefully controlled, etc. So if we've got a large-scale traffic collision, that's obviously going to be a major incident, but what are the risks that might come with that? So for example, we could have spillages, we could have people trapped, all these kind of things, disruption to transport systems. So it's not just thinking about one thing, it's thinking about multiple things. So the second one is going to be prevention. Now this isn't preventing the major incident from happening. Alright, that's a key point to clarify here. What we're saying is if we have a major incident and we've got the risks and hazards, can we prevent anything else, any escalation from taking place? Can we mitigate the results? Alright, so if we've got a particular threat, then what can we prevent or what can we do to stop it from taking place in the first place? You're not going to be able to eliminate anything or everything, but what you've got to think about is how you're going to prevent, as it says there, escalation, how you can mitigate any further issues. Now the next bit just comes from the major incident manual. Alright, so as it says here, a major air incident will produce a toxic environment at the scene, and all services responding should be aware of the need for extra attention to the identification of potential hazards and protection of their staff. A crashed aircraft should be approached from an upwind direction, whether there is a fire or not, due to the potential spread of toxic substances. So the idea is thinking about, you've got a major incident, you've got potential hazards and risks, how can you mitigate those? How can you prevent any further suffering to members of the public? How can you protect members of the public services? What kinds of things can you put in place? Is it something as simple as, coming at it from a different angle? So as it says there, approaching from upwind, so that you're not going to be having stuff blown into your face and making things worse. Alright, so we've got assessment, thinking about types of major incidents that might occur, and then we're trying to think, once they have occurred, how can we prevent anything that is within our control from happening? Alright, so thinking about minimising their impact. So we had the Somerset floods, which is one of the ones that we talked about, alright, and the water supply. Some of you did that, and then thinking about what could the public services do to minimise any hazards. Well, we're going to have a water supply that's going to be contaminated with sewage, etc. So the public services might, for example, shut off the water supply. They might try and get fresh bottles of water to members of the public so they're not having to use their taps. So hopefully that's going to mitigate people getting sick, etc. Right, then we're thinking about preparedness. Obviously, being about prepared, major incidents are going to occur. They are going to be ever evolving. If you take the situation that we're in now with the pandemic, every single day we're getting new advice, we're getting new restrictions placed upon us because either people aren't following the restrictions or things are evolving at a different rate that hadn't been thought about. So the idea is, how can the public services be prepared as best as possible? Now, we've talked about Category 1 and Category 2 responders. What happens if their original plan doesn't work? What contingency plans are we going to put in place? So again, thinking about the pandemic, originally the government's plan was to try and develop herd immunity, so keeping the schools open and passing the virus on to people. They would then get sick, but then hopefully develop antibodies and then be able to go back out. Obviously, that wasn't working. We had pictures of people just going out, treating the weekend like a bank holiday. So the government then put in the further restrictions, so the lockdowns, 2 meters apart, closing everything that wasn't essential. All right, so that's one thing. All right. In other instances, it could be what happens if communication networks go down. How are we going to put in a plan to make sure that people can still communicate with each other? All these things are going to be done on the fly, but also having a contingency plan, a plan B, all the way that we have going through it. Right, then obviously when the major incident occurs, how are the public services going to be able to respond? What is going to be their response? What is going to be the level of their response? If you think the timeline of a major incident, that responding to the phase and the consolidation phase, what are the public services going to be doing in order to try and treat that? All right, we've gone through the objectives, we know the common objectives, we've done that to death. All right, we're going to get that obviously from the meetings of the local resilience forums. They're going to be meeting, deciding what they're going to be able to offer, what they're going to be able to do for each particular major incident. And obviously the manual that we're looking at is the 9th edition, so the question is, what does that tell you? Well, as we discussed, if it's the 9th one, it means there were 8 that came before it, so it means they're constantly updating that with new things. And as we come out of the end of this coronavirus pandemic, I would imagine there's going to be a new version because of something that we weren't necessarily prepared for, and how are we going to deal with that. And then obviously we're thinking about the recovery, how are we going to move towards that new normality, and as we come out of this, it is going to be a new normal. At the minute we're in a lockdown. Chief Medical Officer saying that this could last for up to 6 months. How are we going to process that? How are people going to be coping with that? And once we come out the other side, is there going to be anything that's changed? And obviously the local authorities, as we discussed, have a major role in major incidents, and they're going to be trying to help as much as they can with the local area. All right, thinking about if we've got something other than a pandemic, so if we've got an explosion or a terrorist attack or something like that, are they going to be able to ensure people's houses are safe to go back to? So if we've had flooding, how can we make sure that people are able to go back to their homes without them being put into any further danger? Okay, so as it says, so there we've got our different ones. So there's going to be our main points. So then we've got to think about who's going to be involved in the planning. So again, we're going to come up with agencies here that we are pretty familiar with. We've got our Cat 1 and Cat 2 responders, but there are also some others that might come in that you might have never heard of. Okay, so DEFRA, that's the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So again, they are going to be considering in flooding, how are they going to deal with that at the moment with the pandemic. We've got real issues with food supplies and the environment. How are people going to cope? How are people in rural areas going to get their food if the supply chain is disrupted? All right, we've got the Health and Safety Executive that we've talked about. All right, obviously they're going to be giving their advice on how to keep employees safe, how to keep members of the public safe, with all their different guidance and all the stuff from their website. Highways Agency, well, again, what happens if you need to get somewhere and it's the road that's blocked? Are the Highways Agency going to be able to open up new roads? Are they going to be able to shut roads? What support are they going to be able to get? Now RAINET, so this is the Radio Amateur Radio Network. So the idea being is that if the main communication system goes down, or if the main communication systems are disrupted, that they can actually supply a radio network across the United Kingdom that can be used by public services, by government, in order to keep in contact with who they need to be in contact with. Alright, so it's run by a group of amateurs, but they can and possibly might have a particular role to play. Okay, so now we're thinking about the planning process. So how do we actually go about writing our major incident plan? So obviously each agency is going to be thinking about what they can offer. Local authorities, as we know, large numbers of employees, buildings, schools, sports centres, anything like that that can be called upon in times of this. So for example, at the moment up at the crematorium, they are building a temporary morgue. It's quite a horrible big site that they're building there, but that's a local authority organisation, so they have taken over half of that to build a temporary morgue, hopefully that they're not necessarily going to need. All right, health centres, as we know, hospitals, can they provide an adequate response? How many casualties can they handle? At the minute we're trying to flatten the curve, we're trying to keep people away from hospitals, but if we've got something more a shorter thing like a terrorist attack or flooding or anything like that, natural disasters, how many casualties can each hospital or each health centre handle properly at one time? What resources might they be able to free up if they were called upon to do that? Again, remember, we're talking about special arrangements here for an emergency or a major incident. And then obviously the military. So again, the military are doing an amazing job at the minute, helping to set up things, delivering food. They've been in setting up the Nightingale Hospital at the Excel Centre. They're going to be trying to get food and things to places. They've got a large number of staff that can be used. They're going to be trained in all manner of things. All right, voluntary agencies, as we know, they're going to be able to help because they're going to have large numbers of people that are going to be willing to help. So Red Cross, St John's, victim support, all these kind of things. All right. So for the voluntary agencies as well, they're going to be thinking about, okay, when might they be called upon? So what are they going to be able to, when might they need to be mobilised? What will be expected of them? So what could be asked of them, all right? And who's going to be the person that's going to get in touch with them if in their time of need? And lastly, if we've got the voluntary agencies, all right, what are they going to be doing? Are they actually going to be providing an operational role? So for example, the St John's Ambulance, are they going to be expected to be taking the place of paramedics and doctors and nurses, for example, or are they going to be merely in a support role, so in the background where help might be needed by things like the local authority